Crystal Perry had been born on August 23, 1963, in Rumford, Maine, the youngest of 10 children. Her parents had faced significant difficulties providing for their large family, leading Crystal and her siblings to grow up independent. Crystal and her siblings had always wanted to build their own lives as soon as possible. They eventually moved to different cities and states in search of new opportunities. Had met her future husband Tom in high school. Crystal and Tom married and initially moved to California, but Crystal soon discovered that life in the city was not right for her. After a year and a half, they decided to return to Maine, settling in the small town of Bridgeton, about an hour from Crystal's hometown of Rumford. Crystal found a job at a local shoe store while Tom worked various odd jobs. Crystal and Tom's lives took a new turn when Crystal became pregnant and they welcomed daughter Sarah. Although Tom was initially excited to become a father, Sarah's arrival complicated Tom's relationship with Crystal. Tom began spending more and more time at a local bar, spending almost all of their limited income on alcohol. One time, he even took the money Crystal had saved to buy alcohol, leaving them with almost nothing. As Tom's drinking habits worsened, the family did not have enough money for basic needs, including food. Finally, Crystal decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, Tom occasionally saw Sarah, but he was largely absent from her life. The situation got worse when Tom got a new girlfriend and she started harassing Crystal. This girlfriend would call Crystal, make threats, come to her house, and cause provocations, all because she was upset with Crystal's past relationship with Tom. Crystal's fears for Sarah's safety grew and she became hesitant to let her daughter visit Tom, worried that Tom's new girlfriend might actually harm Sarah. Crystal moved in with her mother and worked hard to save enough money to buy her own house. After years of saving, she bought a small house near a peaceful lake on the outskirts of Bridgerton, was excited to provide a stable and loving environment for her daughter, Sarah. Crystal prioritized giving Sarah the attention and love she deserved. In their free time, Crystal and Sarah enjoyed spending quality time together, often watching movies or chatting with each other. One day was like any other day. Crystal went to work and Sarah went to school. They had their usual dinner together, and Crystal carried Sarah to bed. However, a few hours later, Sarah's peaceful night was broken by a loud scream that startled her. At first, she thought Crystal was arguing on the phone, but it quickly became clear that there was something much more serious going on with Crystal. Crystal had been screaming loudly in the kitchen, causing Sarah to fear that her mother was being attacked. The bedroom door had been slightly open, but the kitchen was out of sight. Stiff with fear, Sarah could not move or make a sound. As she listened, she heard footsteps approaching, making her think that the next attacker would come for her. Feeling scared, she quickly hid behind the bed. However, the footsteps stopped and Sarah heard the sound of a kitchen drawer opening, followed by the clatter of someone rummaging through utensils. Crystal's screams continued, filled with pleas for mercy, until she was stabbed. With each stab, Crystal's voice grew weaker. Sarah realized she could do nothing and would likely be killed as well. After her mother's screams stopped, she left the room and went into the kitchen, where she witnessed a terrible scene. Her mother lay in a large pool of blood covering the floor. Confused, Sarah asked her neighbors for help and eventually found an Italian restaurant whose owner lived in an adjacent building. They opened the door for Sarah and called 911 to report the incident. The officers immediately went to their home. Upon arrival, officers witnessed a gruesome scene. The kitchen was covered in blood, including the floors, walls, and kitchen appliances. Crystal had died, and medical experts determined that Crystal had lost too much blood. Police found a handprint on the front door glass, possibly Sarah's. No other fingerprints were found, but there were many bloody shoe prints on the kitchen floor. Investigators took photos to determine the shoe size and model, assuming they belonged to the killer. A trail of blood led to Sarah's bedroom but suddenly stopped as if the killer had changed his mind. One particular detail caught the detective's attention. The killer had tried to wipe away some blood on the floor. With the blood stains spreading, this effort seemed futile. Further investigation revealed that some of the drops of blood on the floor were irregularly shaped, suggesting they had fallen from the knife. This led investigators to believe that drops of blood might have flown out of the knife during the attack. Investigations showed that, in addition to the initial drops of blood, other drops of blood on the floor appeared to have fallen at a 90-degree angle, suggesting they originated from a higher point. Detectives suspected these drops might belong to the perpetrator, who might have been injured during the crime. Further supporting this theory, the trail of blood drops led directly to a roll of tissue. This showed that the perpetrator used a tissue to stop the bleeding before hastily leaving the scene. Autopsy results showed that Crystal's body had suffered more than 50 stab wounds. The murder weapon, possibly a kitchen knife, was not found at the crime scene, suggesting the perpetrator might have brought it with him. An important detail revealed that the force used was so great that part of the knife broke and was stuck in Crystal's body. The investigation also found evidence of a previous sexual assault. As a result, medical experts were able to collect and analyze the perpetrator's semen along with the blood samples obtained, sending both for further laboratory testing. However, there was a problem. The local DNA laboratory was severely understaffed due to funding problems, leading to a significant backlog. As a result, detectives had to begin the investigation without forensic evidence, which would take at least 6 months to process. The investigation began by ruling out robbery as a motive because nothing was missing from the house. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry, so the police suspected that the victim had arbitrarily opened the door to let the perpetrator in. Since she was wearing pajamas, it was unlikely that she was expecting visitors. Detectives came up with 2 theories. Either the victim knew her killer or someone she didn't know knocked on her door and convinced her to let them in under false pretenses. To pursue this lead, detectives turned their attention to the only witness, Sarah, who was undergoing a medical examination at the hospital. The police began questioning Sarah about the killer, and she explained that she had stayed in the bedroom until the incident was over. However, the police were a bit skeptical about her story. They asked her how she knew her mother had been attacked with a knife, and Sarah replied that it was obvious. Despite her reaction, detectives continued to pressure her, suspecting that she might have been withholding information and might have seen the perpetrator. During the first 3 days after the murder, police questioned Sarah 18 times in the hope that her story would change. However, she always maintained that everything happened as she initially described. Meanwhile, detectives pursued other leads and achieved their first breakthrough. They discovered a pair of boots at a local shoe store whose sole pattern resembled bloody footprints found at the crime scene. Additionally, they learned that Crystal had been harassed by Teresa, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend. Despite evidence that the killer was a man, the police decided to investigate Teresa, considering her history of threatening to kill Crystal. Maybe Teresa had found an accomplice to commit the crime. However, detectives found no evidence to support this theory. Further investigation revealed that Crystal was in a relationship with a man named Dennis at the time of her death. The two had met 2 years ago when Dennis started working at the shoe store. Dennis and Crystal began dating, and Dennis eventually proposed to her. Although Crystal accepted, they never married. Their relationship was tense, with frequent arguments and Dennis engaging in aggressive behavior, such as breaking objects and banging on walls. However, there was no evidence that he ever physically harmed Crystal. The day after Crystal's murder, detectives visited Dennis at his home. When they asked if he had left the house the night before or if he had seen Crystal, Dennis immediately asked if she was dead and then fainted. After regaining consciousness, he answered the detectives' questions. Dennis explained that he had planned to visit Crystal that evening but was delayed because he was helping a friend fix his car. When he later called Crystal, she said it was too late, leading to an argument in Dennis staying home. Police were able to verify Dennis' alibi, confirming that he had helped his friend that evening. Dennis also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of deception, except when asked if he felt responsible for Crystal's death. He replied no, but the test detected his tremors. Additionally, detectives discovered that Dennis had the same shoe size as the killer, but no matching shoes were found in his house. Dennis agreed to provide a DNA sample but made a special request. Dennis had made a special request to the detectives. If they decided to arrest him, he had asked them to enter his workplace through the back door instead of the main entrance. He had explained that he did not want to disrupt the work environment or make noise in front of his colleagues because his boss had always treated him kindly. However, because he had continued to claim innocence, this request had raised suspicions. The police investigation had led to another important discovery. They had contacted Crystal's best friend, who lived in another town, and she had revealed that Crystal had confided in her just weeks before the murder. Crystal had expressed her fear towards Dennis, saying their arguments had escalated and had become more and more heated. Dennis' behavior had also become more and more aggressive, causing Crystal to consider ending their relationship. However, she had hesitated to do so because she was afraid of his reaction. Detectives had also interviewed one of Crystal's co-workers, but she had not provided any useful information during their conversation. However, as soon as the police had left, Dennis had gone to the person's workplace and had begun asking about her conversation with the detectives. The police investigation had continued despite the lack of evidence against the initial suspect, as DNA test results would have taken several months to process. Meanwhile, they had pursued other leads. A strange tip had led them to a local man named Donnie, who had allegedly bragged about killing Crystal while drunk at a party. However, when questioned, Donnie had claimed to have no memory of the party and had denied any involvement in the murder. The police investigation into Crystal's murder had had difficulty finding any concrete clues. In an effort to uncover new information, Crystal's family had offered a $10,000 reward and had distributed flyers around town. However, Teresa, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend, had been seen repeatedly tearing up these flyers, raising suspicions. The ex-husband, Tom, had been thoroughly investigated, but had eventually been ruled out as a suspect due to his severe alcoholism. His heavy daily drinking had made it unlikely he would commit a crime, and he had had no clear motive. Police had also investigated 2 other men Crystal had dated after her divorce, but had found no evidence linking them to the crime. All 3 men, including Tom, had provided DNA samples to be sent to a laboratory for analysis. 9 months after the murder, the lab results had finally come in, but they hadn't matched any of the suspects, including Dennis. This had left detectives with no new leads. They had asked to take Dennis's DNA sample again for further testing, but the results had still been the same. The investigation into Crystal's murder had hit a dead end, causing detectives to reinvestigate their only witness, Sarah. They had suspected that Sarah might be hiding information or that a traumatic experience had caused her to repress memories of the killer. To question her further, police had gone to Texas, where Sarah was living with her aunt. Polygraph tests had been administered to Sarah, but the results hadn't shown any deception. Despite this, investigators had continued to question her for days, asking the same questions over and over again. However, Sarah had always maintained that she had not seen the killer. The case had remained unsolved for several years. Police had continued to interview potential suspects and follow up on leads, but to no avail. The breakthrough had come in the late 1990s with the introduction of the FBI's DNA database. Investigators had uploaded the killer's DNA sample, but unfortunately, no matches had been found. The detective asked Sarah to work with a psychologist to try to recall any repressed memories of the crime. Even though Sarah agreed, the psychologist ultimately concluded that she really didn't remember anything and was telling the truth about not seeing the killer. The case remained unsolved for many years. Detectives continued to investigate but found no new leads. This changed in 2006 when a surprising development occurred. A DNA sample was entered into the FBI database, and it matched blood and semen left at the crime scene where Crystal was killed. The DNA belonged to a man named Michael Hutchinson, who was never suspected in the case. Detectives discovered that in 2003 Hutchinson was arrested for assault and threatening with a weapon, resulting in a sentence of 6 months in prison and 3 years of probation. During his arrest, a DNA sample was collected, but it was not uploaded to the FBI database at the time. It was instead stored in a laboratory. 3 years after the initial DNA sample was taken, Michael was arrested for drunk driving with his children. He was released on bail but failed to appear in court, leading to jail time. Ironically, Michael was arrested on the day of the wedding and put in a prison cell. His DNA sample was retrieved and quickly uploaded to the database. The detective contacted Sarah, informing her of the development but asked her to keep the information confidential until formal charges were filed. When asked if she knew the suspect, Sarah replied that she did not. Given that Michael was already in custody, the detective carefully built the case to prevent any possibility of him evading punishment. Further investigation revealed that at the time of the murder, Michael lived in Bridgerton, just 2 miles from Crystal's residence. When he was 19, Michael lived near the Italian restaurant where Sarah called the police. He regularly drove to his mother's house, which was just a short distance from Crystal's, meaning he often passed by her residence. The detective discovered that Michael could have easily encountered Crystal multiple times before the murder. When questioned in prison, Michael insisted he was not involved in Crystal's murder and denied knowing her, despite the presence of his semen and blood on her body at the crime scene. The detective found his denial unconvincing. During the visit to the prison, the detective observed the noticeable scar on Michael's palm. This was very significant because it was likely that Crystal's killer injured his hand during the crime. While this alone would not have been enough evidence in court, combined with DNA evidence, it contributed to Michael's eventual murder charge. According to the prosecution, Michael, an illegal drug user, saw Crystal as he passed her house on the night of the murder. He decided to assault her, leading to her death. While Michael refused to confess, the available evidence clearly showed that he was responsible for the assault and murder of Crystal. During the trial, an explanation was found for the murderer's lack of fingerprints at the crime scene. It turned out that Michael's job as a bricklayer was the reason. Over time, the constant wear and tear on his hands had erased the patterns on his palms, making it impossible for him to leave fingerprints. Michael presented testimony about his timeline to defend himself. He claimed he had met Crystal at a bar and they had returned to her place to have consensual sex. However, his story became suspicious when he described a strange man wearing a black motorcycle jacket breaking into the house, knocking him unconscious and killing Crystal. When Michael regained consciousness, he allegedly tried to fight off the attacker but had injured his hand. The attacker then fled and Michael also left the crime scene without a reasonable explanation. Michael's story was very unconvincing. The investigation revealed that the only shoe prints at the scene had belonged to Michael. If his story was true, the intruder would have had to take off his shoes before entering the house, which still wouldn't have explained the lack of other marks on the floor. Furthermore, no witnesses had come forward to confirm that Crystal had been at the bar with Michael. The trial ended on April 9, 2007, with Michael being unanimously found guilty. As a result, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole and remained incarcerated. Sarah's life was deeply affected by her mother's death, but she found the strength to move forward with time. She pursued further education, became a writer, and wrote a book about her mother's murder. The devastating news of the death of Nikki Allen, a 7-year-old English girl, shocked the people of Tyne and Wear, Sunderland, England, on October 7, 1992. After her body was discovered in the basement of an old desolate building, the police were called right away to the scene. She had suffered a brick to the head as well as 37 stab wounds. Who could have committed this evil act on a once cheerful little girl? And what was the reason for such wicked deed? Northeastern England's Tyne and Wear is a metropolitan county with a lengthy history. One of its major cities, Sunderland, is a fusion of tradition and modernity. Living in Sunderland offers access to both leisure areas, such as parks and beaches, and historical sites that provide insight into the city's past. The locals are renowned for their friendliness and sense of belonging. The maritime heritage of Tyne and Wear is a significant characteristic, and the River Tyne was crucial to its growth. Despite the region's generally low crime rate, the tragic death of Nikki Allen in 1992 has left a permanent mark on its past. Nikki Allen, the adored daughter of Sharon Henderson and David Allen, was born on August 30, 1985, in Sunderland, northeastern England. She grew up with 3 sisters in the Weirgarth apartment complex, which offered a beautiful view of Sunderland's East End ports. Those who knew Nikki well recall her as a lively and spirited young girl. Nikki enjoyed playing with her friends and cherished her toys, just like any other 7-year-old. Cheese and onion crisps was her favorite, and it was a regular snack for her daily school lunch. The fact that Nikki's maternal grandparents resided in the same building demonstrated how close-knit her family was. Her grandparents were crucial to the upbringing of the kids. Frequently helping Sharon with childcare, it was clear that Sharon was a committed mother. The welfare of her children came first to her. Nikki and her family were living a simple, happy life, but they had no idea that everything was about to change for the worse. Nikki Allen's routine appeared to be typical on the fateful day of October 7, 1992. She spent the evening playing with Stacy, her older sister and cousin. As evening sets in, Nikki's mother, Sharon, made the decision to go outside briefly. She promised her daughters to be back in 5 minutes. The place she was going was not far. She was making her way to the apartment shared by her father and stepmother, which was in the same estate. On getting there, it didn't take long before Nikki and her cousin's playful laughter could be heard echoing down the hallway behind Sharon. "Mom, can we go to the park tomorrow?" The innocent question came from Nikki. Sharon gently told Nikki to go home and meet her sisters after noticing the excitement in her daughter's voice. She then assured her that she would join shortly. By the time Sharon arrived, the mood in the Allen family home had changed from one of merriment to obvious apprehensiveness. Stacy's voice, which was tinged with worry, broke the stillness. "Mom, Nikki didn't come home," she said. Fear took hold. In the hallways, Sharon persistently called Nikki's name. Every shout she made was filled with anxiety, but Nikki was nowhere to be seen. Nikki Allen appeared to have disappeared out of thin air in what seemed like a matter of seconds. Only 150 yards separated Nikki's house from her grandparents' apartment, where she was last seen. The shortness of this distance only added to the intrigue surrounding her abrupt disappearance. The police were notified of her disappearance, and they showed up within an hour. Even though it was economically underdeveloped and frequently disregarded, Sunderland's East End was home to a tight-knit neighborhood. Here, neighbors were more like an extended family who knew each other's daily routines. The rapidly spreading news of Nikki's disappearance caused the locals to come together as a matter of urgency. A search team made up of more than 100 police officers and community volunteers was quickly put together. Finding Nikki was their only task. There was a thorough search. The search team combed through recreational areas, industrial buildings, alleyways, and even the waterfront where the river curved through the city. The search was made more terrifying by the fact that this river was notorious for its deceptive depth and perilous undercurrents. The following morning, a terrifying discovery was made as dawn broke. The center of this tragic story would be the long-abandoned and dilapidated Quayside Exchange building. The search team, led by Nikki's aunt, noticed a pair of shoes outside the building. As they entered, there was a sense of dread in the air. However, what they saw inside would forever haunt them. Inside, Nikki's lifeless body lay with the horrifying signs of a terrible crime. She had endured a vicious attack with a brick and more than 37 stab wounds. The community was shocked by the discovery. An area where people knew one another and where kids could play unrestrained was now surrounded by a foreboding cloud of sorrow and anxiety. The search for Nikki's killer got underway, but the perplexing question persisted. Who could carry out such a heinous deed against a young, defenseless life? Following the tragic discovery of Nikki Allen, the police launched a thorough investigation. Interviewing the locals was their first course of action. This was done in an effort to piece together Nikki's final hours before she disappeared. The more they examined the accounts, the more discrepancies they found, especially when it came to the moment Nikki left her grandparents' apartment. While some said it was 7:30 p.m., others thought it was more like 9:30 p.m., some even suggesting later times. However, the majority of testimonies all agreed that Nikki left about 10 minutes before her mother. Numerous witnesses claimed to have seen Nikki near the Boarhead pub, which was located directly across from her home. Around 10 p.m., she was said to have been engaging in the British custom of asking a guy for a penny on bonfire night. Unsettlingly, a different witness claimed to have heard what appeared to be a young girl scream coming from the direction of the Quayside Exchange building. In a reconstruction shown on BBC Crime Watch, a happy Nikki can be seen skipping past the bar. The video appeared to show her walking alone toward the dock. but she eventually came across a man. Nikki was seen skipping gleefully behind this man who was wearing a crisp white shirt as they crossed the street. The police were able to find CCTV video that appeared to support these eyewitness accounts. Despite the not-so-great video quality, it provided a chilling glimpse of Nikki's final moments before her untimely passing. One name kept coming up as the locals were being interviewed. The Quayside Exchange building, where Nikki's life was tragically cut short, was frequently graced by this person, who was known locally as the Weirdo. 1 week later, following up on this tip, the police took an important step by apprehending 24-year-old George Heron in connection with the murder of Nikki Allen. The neighborhood waited impatiently, hoping that soon, justice would be served for the young girl whose life was taken far too soon. The following years in 1993, the investigation spotlight focused on George Heron, a young man who lived close to the Allen home. George Heron's involvement appeared to be supported by a number of pieces of evidence. In his living space, a knife matching the wounds on Nikki was found. Blood was found on his clothes and shoes as well. Heron's sister gave a puzzling account to the police, which increased the suspicion. She recalled Heron spending an unusually long time in the bathroom the night of the murder, likely washing himself and his clothes. He had never acted in this manner before. Heron vehemently denied any involvement despite the mounting evidence against him. He insisted that he hadn't left the house the night Nikki was killed. For witnesses who saw a man who looked like Heron in two neighborhood pubs, the Boar's Head and the Clarendon, refuted this claim. It's interesting that he was seen buying Nikki's favorite snack, cheese and onion crisps. The police speculated that Heron may have lured Nikki inside the abandoned building using her favorite snacks. Heron's defenses appeared to give way after 3 days of difficult interrogation, which caused him to admit to the crime. It's important to note that he had vehemently denied the accusations 120 times before he finally admitted to the crime. Even though it was circumstantial, the evidence seemed solid, and the police were optimistic about getting a conviction. His trial took place in the Leeds Crown Court, where he was accused of killing Nikki Allen. But things changed in an unexpected way. Heron's recorded confession was rejected by the judge, who cited overbearing police methods as the cause. Heron was cleared of all charges relating to the murder of Nikki Allen. Heron was given a new identity after the trial and relocated from Sunderland for his safety. In an unexpected turn of events, Sharon Henderson, Nikki's mother, brought a civil lawsuit against Heron in 1994. She charged him with killing a child by abusing her. Henderson won her case, and the judge ordered Heron to pay her more than £7,000 in damages. The ordered sum, however, remained unpaid because Heron's whereabouts was elusive. Nikki Allen's pursuit of justice was still met with more questions than solutions. Years after the tragic death of Nikki Allen, the pursuit of justice never abated. A new development occurred in February 2014 when Stephen Grieverson, a convicted serial killer, was detained in connection with the killing of Nikki. He was told, however, that he wouldn't face any further action in the case after a lengthy questioning. 2 years later, in May 2016, optimism started to emerge. Sharon Henderson was approached by a woman whose identity was kept secret to the general public, who claimed to have previously unreleased details about Nikki's murder. This young girl, who was babysitting nearby when Nikki vanished and was only 12 years old at the time of the crime, decided to speak to the police after keeping quiet for so long. Encouraged by this fresh information, Henderson fervently argued for a thorough re-examination of her daughter's murder in September of the same year. She started an online petition, requesting that the Northumbria police investigate the case from the scratch. With the petition, the neighborhood showed its unwavering support, gathering more than 500 signatures in less than a day. The following month, Sharon Henderson contacted Grieverson, pleading with him to share any information he might know about Nikki's passing. This was done in an effort to leave no stone unturned. By April, Henderson had met with the Detective Chief Inspector, Lisa Thieker, and the Chief Constable of the Northumbria Police, Constable Steve Ashman. The two officers reaffirmed their unshakable dedication to seeing that Nikki receives justice. There was a significant development in October 2017. The The police declared that they had been successful in obtaining a DNA sample from a male who may be connected to the crime. This new development gave hope for a solution. The investigation then took a clear turn in April 2018. A suspect in connection with the murder of Nikki Allen was taken into custody after Northumbria police conducted a raid on a home in the Stockton neighborhood of Teesside. The person arrested was formally charged with the heinous crime in 2022, 4 years after his arrest. 54 years old, David Thomas Boyd was the suspect. David Thomas Boyd was originally born David Thomas Bell on June 1, 1967, in London. As a result of his father's military service, David Thomas Boyd experienced a childhood characterized by constant movement. He had no close relatives when he moved to Sunderland. He may have been more likely to frequently change his identity because of this detachment. He changed his name several times over the years, going by the names Jason Branson, John Eastman, and David Thomas Smith, among others. When David Thomas Boyd was found guilty of disturbing the peace in 1986, a darker side of him became apparent. This conviction was the result of a disturbing incident in which he approached a young girl and asked for a kiss. More disturbing fantasies about young girls were revealed during his subsequent conversations with the probation officer. David Boyd was uncomfortably close to Nikki Allen's family. He shared a floor with Nikki's grandparents at Weirgarth. He was more than just a farf neighbor. He was closely connected to the family. Nikki's babysitter at the time was his girlfriend, but despite being so close, he continued to have dark tendencies. Boyd was one of those questioned by the police when the news of Nikki's case first surfaced, but he was able to avoid being suspected by providing a false alibi. Boyd frequently changed his name over the years, perhaps feeling the net of capture tightening in on him, or being motivated by guilt. His constant name change was a futile attempt to get away from justice's looming shadow. The trial for David Thomas Boyd began at Newcastle Crown Court on April 20, 2023. The prosecution painted a terrifying picture, alleging that Boyd had lured Nikki Allen, a young girl, to a desolate area close to the River Wear. It was thought that she had taken a blow to the head there, which had caused her to bleed. Nikki was not in distress when the witness saw her. Instead, she was skipping to keep up with the man. As the story went on, the prosecution claimed that Boyd had dragged Nikki inside the abandoned old exchange building. The unexpected event got worse inside. Nikki's skull was broken after being hit with a brick. The bloodshed continued after that. Her chest, heart, and lungs were the targets of numerous stab wounds. According to the post-mortem findings, Nikki was probably knocked out by the initial blow before being stabbed. A witness's chilling testimony accurately identified the time of the crime, recalling a scream on the evening of October 6th around 10 p.m. The evidence at trial showed that David Thomas Boyd, who went by several names, was 25 years old when this evil act was committed. He was charged with having circumstantial but strong evidence against him. DNA from Boyd was discovered on Nikki's clothes. Boyd offered an absurd defense, claiming that Nikki may have been exposed to the DNA from his saliva after he spat from his balcony. He also mentioned that he was familiar with the old exchange building because he had gone there a few days earlier with a young boy for pigeon hunting. Defense attorneys claimed that the evidence was just a collection of unintentional coincidences. Justice Christina Lambert emphasized the circumstantial nature of the evidence and emphasized the lack of specific evidence linking Boyd to the crimes. Interestingly, Boyd declined to give a witness statement at the trial. After 2.5 hours of deliberation on May 12, 2023, the jury found Boyd guilty of killing Nikki Allen. The long-awaited decision gave Nikki's family some measure of comfort. Sharon Henderson, Nikki's mother, shared her thoughts with BBC News as she reflected on the agonizing 30-year pursuit of justice. On May 23, 2023, Boyd was given a life sentence with the requirement that he serve at least 29 years before being considered for parole. David Thomas Boyd's first opportunity to achieve freedom would therefore come in August 2049. For those involved, the resolution of the Nikki Allen case caused a flurry of emotions. 57-year-old Sharon Henderson, Nikki's mother, expressed her utter dismay at David Boyd's sentence. She thought the decision was shameful and that Boyd shouldn't ever be eligible for parole. This is the recurring narrative for families like mine, injustice, Sharon said. Nikki was remembered by Sharon, who was only 25 years old when her daughter was tragically taken from her, as an energetic youngster with a radiant smile. Over the years, felt the weight of the community's misdirected rage because many people falsely accused her of being a bad mother. They focused their anger on her rather than the real offender. Boyd's actions destroyed Sharon's family, but she persevered in her pursuit of justice for her daughter, displaying incredible fortitude. There were many difficulties along the way, including her own arrest due to her accusations against people she thought were protecting the guilty. At the time of the tragedy, Nikki's father, David Allen, was 28 years old. He said that after that fateful night, his life took a dark turn. He was incredibly hurt and furious with Boyd. "The anguish is indescribable," he said, highlighting the striking contrast between Boyd's existence and Nikki's short life. A surprising turn of events saw George Heron, who was initially charged in the case, receive an apology from Northumbria police. Heron's reaction was a concoction of sorrow, disgust, and rage, especially toward the initial investigators who, in his opinion, had betrayed him. Prosecutor Richard Wright Casey noted that the 1992 investigation was rife with mistakes. The team that reopened the case, however, approached it with fresh eyes and without preconceptions. They meticulously gathered 2,500 documents, recorded 1,200 statements, and obtained DNA samples from over 800 men across the country. The judge praised their extraordinary efforts and emphasized the crucial role DNA evidence played in convicting David Thomas Boyd. The case of Alex Murdaugh. Alex Murdaugh attempted to follow in his family's footsteps by pursuing a law degree from the University of North Carolina, where he met his future wife, Margaret Maggie Branton. They started dating in 1991 and got married 2 years later, on August 14, 1993, at the Second Presbyterian Church in South Carolina. Alex and Maggie had 2 sons, Richard Buster Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh. Alex joined his family's law firm, PMPD, as a personal injury attorney, aiming to continue his family's legacy. However, unlike his ancestors, Alex misused the power and influence his family's firm provided, covering up financial crimes, theft, and possibly even murder. For over a decade, Alex's dishonest dealings went unnoticed until his youngest son, Paul, was involved in a fatal boating accident. This incident was the latest in a series of suspicious deaths surrounding the Murdaugh family, leading people to speculate that these accidents were not coincidental and were instead part of a larger cover-up, given the family's history and resources. Here's what happened on February 23, 2019. Paul Murdaugh, fresh out of high school, took his family's boat to Pucas Island for a party with friends. The group, including his girlfriend Morgan Dowie, Anthony Cook, and Miley Allman, wanted an unsupervised night of fun. They planned a house party and oyster roast on the island. To make the night complete, used his older brother's ID to buy beer and hard liquor. They left the Moordal River house around 7 p.m. and continued partying until midnight. Feeling restless, Paul suggested driving the boat to downtown Beaufort, where he and his friend Connor had 2 rounds of shots at around 1 a.m. As they headed back to the boat, a surveillance camera caught a tender moment between Anthony and Mallory. Paul, who was heavily intoxicated, started acting strangely on a boat ride with friends. At 1:15 a.m., the group got back on the water, but things quickly spiraled out of control. Paul drove the boat in circles, showing signs of intoxication, and got into an argument with the others. Anthony wanted to get out on a nearby rock, but Paul refused. GPS footage later showed that the boat's speed increased at some point. Although Paul denied deliberately speeding up, he was in control of the wheel. The boat crashed into Oro Creek Bridge at 2:20 a.m., throwing Mallory into the water. The others were severely injured. Connor broke his jaw, and Morgan's hand was badly hurt. Connor called 911, and help arrived soon after. When the deputy sheriff arrived, he saw blood in the main compartment and a large split in the hull from the impact. All the teenagers involved were extremely drunk, and everyone except Anthony required hospital treatment. Paul refused treatment despite being extremely agitated and having a blood alcohol level of 0.243, significantly higher than the legal limit. The search for Mallory's body took 8 days, and she was found to have died from a combination of blunt force trauma to the head and drowning. Despite multiple eyewitnesses stating that Paul was out of control while driving the boat, he was not arrested or charged. This led to rumors that Alex Murdaugh had used his influence to protect his son from justice. In March 2019, the Murdaugh family was served with a wrongful death lawsuit. Mallory's family alleged that Paul's mother, Maggie, was aware that her son was drunk when they went boating and that Buster had helped them obtain fake IDs to buy alcohol. Paul was finally charged with 3 felonies on April 18, 2019, but he never made it to court because he died before his trial. A series of mysterious deaths have been linked to the Murdaugh family. One incident involved Stephen Smith, a gay teenager, who was found dead on July 8, 2015. His official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, and it was initially ruled a hit-and-run incident with no suspect arrested. However, Stephen's mother believed he was the victim of a hate crime. There were rumors that Stephen was in a relationship with Alex Murdaugh's oldest son, Buster, and that Buster might have been involved in Stephen's death. Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh family's longtime housekeeper, died on February 26, 2018 due to complications from a severe head injury. Alex Murdaugh claimed that his dogs had caused her to trip and fall, but there was no autopsy to confirm this account. The case was reopened on March 22, 2023, and it was revealed that Gloria's death was actually a murder, although no suspects have been named. Alex Murdaugh's family was involved in a wrongful death lawsuit after his housekeeper Gloria Satterfield died in 2018. The lawsuit resulted in a $4.3 million insurance policy settlement, but the money never reached Satterfield's sons instead. Murdaugh allegedly conspired with his friend Corey Fleming, a lawyer and godfather, to one of Murdaugh's sons to steal the payout. The money was diverted to Murdaugh's bank account and the Satterfield family was never notified. A Satterfield's sons filed a new civil lawsuit against Murdaugh in September 2021. On the same day, state investigators opened a criminal investigation into Satterfield's death, citing inconsistencies in the coroner's report. The Satterfield family allowed authorities to exhume Satterfield's body for further investigation. Meanwhile, Murdaugh was facing numerous financial and embezzlement charges. He was allegedly involved in a money laundering and painkiller ring with his distant cousin Curtis Smith, which lasted from 2013 to 2021. On September 4, 2021, Murdaugh orchestrated a scheme in which Smith shot him in an attempt to collect a $10 million life insurance policy. However, the bullet only caused superficial injuries, and Murdaugh was able to call 911 himself. Days later, Murdaugh confessed to the scheme and was charged with insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and filing a false police report. He surrendered himself and was taken into custody. 2 days later, he announced his resignation from his family's law firm and entered rehab. However, it was soon revealed that Murdaugh had misappropriated $792,000 from his law firm. His law license was indefinitely suspended in September 2021. Investigators continued to uncover numerous financial crimes, tax evasions, and embezzlements committed by Murdaugh. After leaving rehab, Murdaugh was arrested again and charged with 2 felony counts of obtaining property by false pretenses. He was denied bond and later indicted on 27 counts of financial misconduct, accused of stealing money from clients, lawyers, and the Satterfield family. Alex Murdaugh faced additional charges on December 9, 2021, with 21 new counts added to the existing 27, bringing the total to 48. The charges included forgery, money laundering, computer crimes, breach of trust, and obtaining signature or property by false pretenses. It was estimated that Murdaugh had stolen over $6.2 million from his victims. The state's investigation into his business dealings took months, with new charges emerging almost daily. By June 2022, the charges against him had risen to 81. And by the time he was formally disbarred on July 13, 2022, he faced 84 criminal charges and 11 lawsuits. One of the victims' mothers filed a legal claim against the estates of Margaret and Paul Murdaugh, raising questions about the character of the once prominent attorney. Could he be hiding something even more sinister, such as the murder of his wife and son? What could have been his motive? The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLRD, revisited the double murder case, considering new information gathered during the investigation into Murdaugh's financial crimes. They discovered that Alex and Maggie Murdaugh's marriage was troubled, and Maggie was living apart from her husband at their beach home on Edisto Island. Maggie's sister, Marion Proctor, told law enforcement that Maggie had not planned to see Alex on the night of the murders. Alex had asked Maggie to meet him at the family's hunting lodge, where she and her younger son were later found shot dead near the dog kennels. Alex claimed to have taken a long nap before leaving to visit his ailing mother, who suffered from dementia. He stated that he was away for 45 minutes to an hour and a half and found his wife and son dead upon his return. However, law enforcement suspected that Alex's timeline was questionable and lacked a clear motive for the murders. The investigation revealed that weeks before the murder, the state grand jury had subpoenaed Alex Murdaugh's finances, which threatened to expose his financial wrongdoings. Additionally, his law firm had discovered his misappropriation of company funds, and he was confronted about it on June 7, 2021, the day of the murder. State authorities believed that the financial pressure had pushed Alex to hatch a plan to divert attention from his crimes and garner sympathy in the public eye. 13 months after the fatal shooting, Alex Murdaugh was charged with the murders of his wife and son. The prosecutor alleged that Murdaugh had shot and killed his wife and son at close range with a shotgun and an AR-style rifle. The murder weapons were never found. Murdaugh's defense team argued that two shooters were involved due to the different weapons used. Expert witness testimony suggested that the shooter was likely between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 4 inches tall, which ruled out Alex Murdaugh as a suspect due to his 6'4" height. However, under cross-examination, the expert admitted that there were other possible explanations for the bullet trajectory beyond the shooter's height. The investigation revealed that Maggie was shot with 300 blackout ammunition from an AR-style rifle, and a box of this ammo was found at the Murdaugh family estate. Prosecutors argued that Alex killed his wife and son to gain sympathy and avoid accountability for his financial crimes. Alex's lawyers countered that this didn't make sense, as it would only shift attention to himself and put him in the spotlight of a murder investigation. Alex was a person of interest from the start of the investigation, but his lawyer claimed he had an ironclad alibi for the night of the murders and no motive to kill his family. Prosecutors presented 2 videos taken on the night of the murder, which appeared to show Alex wearing different shirts. The Snapchat video taken from Paul's phone showed Alex wearing a blue shirt, while the body cam footage showed him wearing a different shirt. Investigators couldn't find the blue shirt, and prosecutors suggested Alex tried to influence a key witness's account of what he was wearing. Cell phone data and testimony from Alex's mother's caregiver confirmed that Alex was only at his mother's home for 15 to 20 minutes, contradicting his claim of staying for 45 minutes to an hour and a half. The most crucial piece of evidence was a video found on Paul's phone recorded at 8:44 p.m., just minutes before the murders. The video featured the voices of Paul, Maggie, and Alex, placing Alex at the scene of the crime. This contradicted his previous alibi and confirmed his presence at the dog kennels where the murders occurred. Alex testified that he didn't shoot his wife or son, but admitted to lying about his alibi. Alex Murdaugh changed his story, claiming that his opioid addiction and resulting paranoia led him to lie to law enforcement. However, prosecutors argued that Murdaugh fabricated this excuse after murdering his wife and son. They believed he used his wife's phone to create an alibi by making calls and sending texts, including, "Me babe" at 9:47 p.m. Phone data showed that Murdaugh's and his wife's phones locked simultaneously, and Alex's phone recorded a sudden increase in steps around the time of the murder. Prosecutors suggested this was evidence of him trying to hide or dispose of evidence, but his lawyers disputed this, pointing out that the step patterns on Alex's phone did not match his wife's. The decisive evidence came from a video recorded at the dog kennels. After deliberating for just 3 hours, the jury found Murdaugh guilty on all counts on March 2, 2023. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. Additionally, he received a 5-year sentence for possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Murdaugh pleaded guilty to 22 financial crimes as part of a deal, but maintains his innocence in the murders. He appealed his conviction on March 9, 2023. In a surprise move, his lawyers filed a motion for a new trial, alleging that Rebecca Hill, a court clerk, had engaged in jury tampering. Hill denies the allegations, which include advising jurors to disregard Murdaugh's testimony and other defense evidence, pressuring them to reach a quick guilty verdict, and misrepresenting critical information to the trial judge. A hearing is scheduled for Murdaugh's lawyers to present evidence and witnesses to support their claim. However, a judge has not yet been assigned to preside over the hearing. With over 100 financial and drug crime charges pending, as well as multiple lawsuits, it is clear that the Alex Murdaugh case is far from over. In the early hours of July 20th, 1971, a 911 call went out of Burlington, Vermont when a lady contacted the police to report the murder of her roommate, Rita Curran. It appeared that the lady who had been at work a day before had returned to see Rita Curran in the pool of her own blood on the bed they both shared. When the police arrived, they discovered that someone had broken into the lady's apartment and had beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled Rita Curran to death. They also found evidence that Rita Curran had strongly resisted her attacker, putting up a fight. The question of who killed Rita Curran bugged her family and the Burlington Police Department for years, but the killer remained a mystery for decades despite the police looking into hundreds of tips. However, 52 years later, Rita Curran's killer was eventually identified. Rita Curran was born on the 21st of June, 1947 in Brooklyn, Kings County, New York, to Thomas and Mary Curran. She was described as a kind, generous, and beautiful person who wouldn't do anyone any harm. When Rita Curran turned 24 years old, in the summer of 1971, she decided to move out of her parents' home for the first time, into a shared apartment on Brooks Avenue in Burlington, Vermont, with 3 other roommates whom she did not know well. At the time, she was a second-grade teacher at Milton Elementary School and had started graduate courses at the University of Vermont, while she worked during the summer break as a maid at a local motel. Unfortunately, just 2 weeks after she left her family's house, she was murdered in her apartment in Burlington, Vermont. According to police report, she seemed ready for bed the night she was attacked, as she was found dead with curlers in her hair. Many people know Burlington to be a small and friendly city, but when Rita Curran was killed, it caused ripples of fear in the city because at that time, many Burlington residents left their front doors unlocked. This could explain why Rita Curran's apartment door might not be locked at the time of her murder, since the police did not discover any visible force used on the entrance door. During the investigation, police officers collected evidence from the crime scene that included a single cigarette found near Rita Curran's arm, which was believed the killer left to burn out. They also interviewed Rita Curran's neighbors and investigated hundreds of tips. Among the neighbors interrogated were a newly wedded couple, Williams and Michelle DeRuse, who lived in an apartment 2 floors above Rita Curran's at the time of her murder. They, however, told investigators that they had been together all night and didn't hear or see anything. The police had a list of 13 suspects, in which Ted Bundy was one of them. It appeared that the location of the local motel where Rita Curran worked was adjacent to serial killer Ted Bundy's birthplace, the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers. Rita Curran's murder and crime scene was similar to how Ted Bundy attacked his victims, and this led retired FBI agent John Bassett to propose him as a suspect at the time. In order to find closure and to ask if truly he killed Rita Curran, Mary Campbell Curran, Rita Curran's sister, wrote a letter to Florida's death row where Ted Bundy was being held. In response, the FBI told her that Ted Bundy had refused to confirm or deny his involvement in Curran's death, and there was no evidence that firmly placed him in Burlington on that date of the murder. However, Detective Robert D. Keppel interviewed Ted Bundy, who later told him that he had murdered a young woman in 1971 in Burlington when he was there to obtain information about his birth. But on January 22, 1989, the eve of his execution, Ted Bundy denied his involvement in Rita Curran's case to FBI Special Agent William Hagmaier. Having exhausted all leads, and without an improved DNA technology to pinpoint a suspect, the case went cold for over 4 decades. According to Burlington's acting police chief, John Murad, the department never stopped seeking justice for Rita Curran's family. In 2014, the Burlington's police department sent all the evidence collected at the crime scene, including the cigarette, to a forensic lab in New York City for DNA testing. Though the tests compiled a DNA profile of the person who had smoked the cigarette, it didn't match any DNA in databases compiled by law enforcement agencies across the country. That meant the person with the DNA on the cigarette but likely never had genetic material entered into the database, possibly because the person didn't have a felony conviction. The DNA testing also didn't match the known DNA of any of the police's 13 main suspects. However, in 2019, Detective Lieutenant James Trebb decided to try a new approach to the case. Instead of having a single detective work on the case alone, per the usual department strategy, Lieutenant Trebb decided to bring in a new team of detectives and expert technicians who discussed and reviewed the Rita Curran's case. This team treated the case as if it had just been committed. They began retesting evidence by sending the cigarette for DNA analysis again, but this time, they used genetic genealogy, which is a process that uses DNA databases for genealogy research to identify possible family members of the person whose DNA is unmatched. After the DNA analysis, the genetic genealogy expert concluded that the cigarette DNA had strong connections to relatives of William DeRoos, the man who lived 2 floors above Rita Curran's apartment in 1971, who had been questioned alongside his wife by detectives and claimed to have been in his home during the time of the murder. The investigators then searched and found a living half-brother of Williams DeRoos who willingly provided a DNA sample. After the test, it was however concluded that the cigarette DNA belonged to Williams DeRoos. In 2022, more evidence at the crime scene, including Rita Curran's ripped housecoat, were sent to a crime lab in Florida where they performed new DNA extracting techniques. Before then, the detectives had sent the genetic evidence from the cigarette to a genealogy company to see if a bigger database of DNA could help them pinpoint the killer. The scientist and genealogy expert was able to match the DNA from the cigarette William DeRoos within hours of research through genealogical records and public records. Also, finally, the DNA left on Rita Curran's ripped housecoat also matched the DNA on the cigarette butt. The investigators later discovered that William DeRoos died at age 46 in 1986 at a San Francisco hotel from a drug overdose. Shortly after Rita Curran's murder, he and his wife left Vermont and got divorced. In an interview with the police, William DeRoos' ex-wife, Michelle, who had moved to Eugene, Oregon, and had changed her name, told investigators she had lied in 1971 about her husband being with her all night in their apartment. It was established that William DeRoos had gotten into an argument with his wife on the evening of July 1971 and had gone out for a walk to supposedly cool off. He returned later that night and told his wife the next morning to tell the police investigating Rita Curran's death that he had never left their apartment, warning her that his past criminal record might unfairly make him a suspect in her death. Detective Thomas Chenette, who interviewed Michelle, said he didn't believe she knew William DeRoos had killed Curran, but was protecting him because they were newly married and obviously in love, and he had a criminal record. After their divorce, William DeRoos moved to Thailand and became a monk. He then came back to San Francisco, United States in 1974, where he met his second wife, Sarah Hepting. Sarah Hepting said in an interview with Burlington Police that William DeRoos had a penchant for sudden outbursts of violence. She said there were 2 instances where he had been extremely violent around her. One of which was when they both were having a conversation with a female friend and he had taken a pocket knife and stabbed the woman in her abdomen for no reason whatsoever. He was arrested, but the woman did not press charges. DeRoos later told Hepting that he thought it was her he stabbed. Sarah Hepting said the second instance of DeRoos' violence was when he suddenly started to strangle her for no reason when they were having dinner. She said that was the last straw and the reason she left him. After Rita Curran's case was declared solved, even though her parents unfortunately died without knowing her killer, her living family and friends remembered her and were glad that they finally have closure. Jim Rabber, Rita Curran's second-grade student, remembered her as a kind and beautiful person. He said, "We actually did a play the year that I had her. I forgot what the play was about, but I was a dancing clown holding a teddy bear. She told me that I could keep the teddy bear, and I still have the teddy bear, I just can't find it." Her sister, Mary Curran Campbell, said, "We now have 2 generations in our family who never knew her." Tom Curran, her brother, said, I don't think so much about the guy who did this as I do about Rita and my parents and what they went through. I pray to my parents and I pray to Rita." Closing the case, Lieutenant Trabe said, "We're all confident that William DeRuis is responsible for the aggravated murder of Rita Curran. But because he died in a hotel room of a drug overdose, he will not be held accountable for his actions, but this case will be closed." Around 6:30 a.m., on January 18th of 1981 in Camarillo, California, about 50 miles from Los Angeles, two newspaper delivery boys discovered the naked body of 20-year-old Rachel Zendejas, an Oxnard college student and a single mom of two who had recently gone through a divorce. She was murdered in an apartment complex's carport just across the street from her apartment in 700 block of Mobile Avenue, which she shared with her brother and two daughters, who were 1 and 2 years old at the time of her murder. The police got to the crime scene and retrieved evidence. During the investigation, detectives learned that Rachel Zendejas had gone out the evening before her murder to hire a couple of babysitters to stay with her girls. She then went out that evening and came back home the following morning, after which she dropped off the babysitters. Her killer was believed to have attacked her as she got out of her vehicle after returning home from dropping off the babysitters. Her case was investigated for several years until all leads were exhausted and the case eventually became cold. However, before the end of the year, in the early hours of December 12, 1981, a neighbor called the police to report a fire outbreak at an apartment in Oxnard. Members of the Oxnard Fire Department rushed to the scene and extinguished the fire. When done, they discovered the naked body of 21-year-old Lisa Gondex in the bathtub of the apartment. Her killer had raped her, strangled her, and then set the apartment on fire. Her neighbors heard screams but did not call 911 until they smelled smoke. Lisa Gondek was a retail worker living in Oxnard, about 10 miles west of Camarillo, and she had attended a club at the Port Hueneme Naval Base on the night of December 11, 1981. She went to a disco with her friends, after which her friends later dropped her off at her home at around 1:30 a.m. the following day. She was discovered dead in her bathtub, and her killer was unknown for decades. Lisa Gondek was said to have been on a visit to Oxnard from Connecticut for a planned 2-week trip to visit a friend in the U.S. Navy. However, she ultimately decided to move to Oxnard months before she was murdered. She had made a promise to her loved ones to spend the Christmas with them. In her words, she said, "Mom, I'll be home for Christmas." Lisa Gondek had moved in with a childhood best friend and got a job at a teen clothing store in the Esplanade Shopping Center in Oxnard. Being new to the area didn't stop her from quickly making new friends. According to her roommate, Lisa Gondek was a kind person and beautiful in and out. In her words, she said, "If Lisa had $1, she would split it with you." Rachel Zendejas and Lisa Gondek cases were separately investigated from each other until in 2002, when the suspect's DNA from Rachel Zendejas' crime scene was sent to the FBI's combined DNA index system. A search was conducted on the criminal database for felons in order to pinpoint the killer, but it yielded no results. However, 23 years after the murder, in 2004, the investigators working on Lisa Gondek's case utilized DNA testing and later informed the Ventura County Sheriff's Office that they had linked both Rachel's and Daha's and Lisa Gondek's homicides cases to a single suspect. The DNA, however, did not return any results that could put a face to the suspect, and the case went cold again. Another stunning connection about both women going to a nightclub called Huntington in the hours before their deaths was established. The club, now closed, was a hot spot across from the Esplanade Mall. In December 2019, Ventura County's cold case unit took over the cases again and applied genetic genealogy, an advanced DNA testing that is used to identify possible relatives to the suspects. The investigation then provided new leads, and further DNA testing confirmed that Tony Garcia was the suspect in both homicides. Tony Garcia resided in Oxnard at the time of his arrest in February 7, 2023. He had been right under the noses of the detectives for over 4 decades. He was born in Roswell, New Mexico, but was enlisted in the U.S. Navy and stationed at Point Mugu near Oxnard. Tony Garcia was, however, discharged from service in 1980 but remained in Oxnard, where he became a karate student and instructor for many years. He was working as a carpenter at the time of his arrest. It is not known if Tony Garcia knew any of his victims. Tony Garcia was charged with 2 counts of murder, plus special allegations of committing murder while engaged in a rape and committing murder while engaged in a kidnapping. At his first appearance in court, he was ordered to be held without bail. Following Tony Garcia's arrest, Rachel Zendeja's brother, Roy Rodriguez, said, "I am alive for this. It is my purpose to get this thing solved for Rachel." The case of Kate Waring. Kate Waring was born in Charleston, South Carolina, into a loving family with 2 siblings and parents who worked hard to provide the best possible life for their children. From a young age, Kate demonstrated a deep love for animals, which led her to volunteer at various animal shelters during her teenage years. Apart from her compassion for animals, Kate was also an accomplished dancer with a wide circle of friends and a radiant personality. To all appearances, Kate grew up in a supportive and nurturing environment, and in many ways this was true. However, Kate's life took a dramatic turn just before she went off to college. In a private conversation with her parents, Kate revealed that she had been abused by someone close to the family when she was younger. Although she chose not to disclose the identity of the perpetrator, her revelation sent shockwaves through her family. Her parents were unaware of the trauma Kate had been silently enduring for years, leaving them reeling from the news. After sharing her dark secret, Kate's parents did everything in their power to support her, but the trauma's consequences only seemed to intensify over time. Initially, Kate struggled with addiction, first with alcohol and later with illegal substances. Her parents suggested therapy, which she reluctantly agreed to. They also encouraged her to move back home, hoping the family's presence would help her cope. Despite being an independent adult, agreed to return home. At first, therapy seemed to be having a positive impact, but Kate struggled to break free from the past's heavy burden and live life to the fullest. The psychiatrist diagnosed her with depression, but everything changed when her father, always concerned and eager to help, suggested a trip to anywhere she desired. Kate was thrilled by the idea and soon set her heart on traveling beyond the Arctic Circle. Her dream was to witness polar bears in their natural habitat, and despite her traumatic experience, her love for animals remained unwavering. Kate and her parents searched for the perfect tour and soon purchased tickets for a trip to the Arctic Circle. Kate was thrilled to be embarking on this adventure, and as a result, her parents witnessed a significant transformation in her demeanor, replacing her depressive state with a cheerful and optimistic outlook. When they finally embarked on the trip, Kate was ecstatic. During the journey, Kate and her parents had a fantastic time on the boat, which took them to the Arctic Circle, where Kate befriended a Russian tourist. They remained in contact throughout the trip and continued exchanging letters afterward. Kate developed strong feelings for him, and eventually, after returning home, she decided to visit Russia. Upon arriving, they reunited, and she even contemplated staying longer in the country. But due to visa problems, Kate was forced to return home. Despite this setback, it seemed that Kate had finally overcome her depression. Back home, she planned to resolve her visa issues and even started writing a book for her children. Her life was finally taking a turn for the better. On Saturday, June 12, 2009, Kate's life took a dramatic turn. Her family was away on a business trip, leaving her alone at home. Normally, Kate would call her father to reassure him that everything was okay, but this time, she failed to do so. Her concerned father tried calling her back, but there was no response. Given Kate's past struggles with alcohol and substance abuse, he asked someone to check on her at home. When the person arrived, Kate was nowhere to be found, but her bedroom light was still on, suggesting she might return soon. However, she didn't show up. Furthermore, Kate had left behind her essential medication, which she was supposed to take regularly. Despite their growing anxiety, Kate's parents decided not to panic and waited for her return, considering her age of 28 and ability to take care of herself. Her father decided to wait until Monday before involving the police. On Monday morning, Kate Waring's father received a call from the bank. A bank employee informed him that someone had tried to cash a check worth more than $4,000, supposedly signed by Kate. However, the bank couldn't get in touch with Kate directly. and as her father was a co-signer on her account, they reached out to him instead. The situation seemed highly unusual, because Kate's father was certain that his daughter only had a few $100s in her account, which is why the bank's security team contacted him. However, Kate's signature on the check appeared genuine. They also provided the name of the man who had brought in the check, Ethan Mack. The father did not recognize him, but since the bank authenticated Kate's signature, he assumed the man was an acquaintance of his daughter. Nevertheless, he decided to contact the police, as Kate remained unreachable. The detectives began investigating Kate's disappearance, and Ethan Mack was their first point of inquiry. He claimed to have known Kate for years, and stated that she had written the check to settle old debts. According to Ethan, he frequently provided Kate with money for clothing, jewelry, and other purchases. Conversations with Kate's friends revealed that she had been friends with Ethan for an extended period, although they indicated that their relationship had never been romantic in nature, despite being close. Ethan claimed that he and Kate met on Friday night and dined at a restaurant together. Afterwards, he drove her home and went about his own business. He even produced correspondence with Kate, which corroborated his account of their dinner. Ethan allowed the detectives to search his house, where he lived with his mother, as well as his car. Although the search yielded nothing suspicious, the police still found the situation surrounding the check to be peculiar and were not quick to dismiss him as a suspect. Ethan eventually called the police station, demanding to be left alone. The police worked to reconstruct the timeline of the Friday night Kate was last seen. She had met with her therapist that afternoon, followed by a trip to the gym. Later, she entered a store, purchasing a bottle of wine. Security cameras captured her on the phone at that time, possibly speaking with Ethan, who later picked her up and they headed to a restaurant. Kate's parents remembered another unsettling detail. On the day she vanished, Kate had mentioned having some problems, but refused to elaborate. Her parents didn't recall this conversation until days later. Unfortunately, this information didn't aid the search, as weeks passed and Kate remained missing. Her parents felt the police weren't doing enough, given Kate's troubled past. However, in August, the case gained new life when a group of former police officers, led by lawyer Andy Savage, took it up. This group had been privately investigating unresolved cases, and Kate Waring's case had caught their attention. The team of 5 individuals, all with extensive police experience, began investigating Kate's disappearance. Former Detective James Randall was the first to examine Kate's bedroom, where he found 2 suspicious elements. The first was a packet of medication that Kate regularly took, which was concerning because her parents confirmed she would never intentionally stop taking it. Therefore, the fact that the packet was left at home was alarming. The second suspicious element was Chinese currency on Kate's bed, which was peculiar because her parents had no idea where she had obtained it or why she needed it. The team then involved Bobby Mitter, an expert in gathering online information about individuals and tracking them. His skills proved invaluable, and he quickly discovered that on the night of her disappearance, around 10 p.m., Kate had called her friend James, who did not answer the phone. Instead, she left him a very troubling voicemail, claiming someone had stolen her credit cards. The investigation also revealed that her phone was last active at 1:53 a.m., when for some reason she called her own voicemail. Further investigation led team member Lewis to discover that the call was made from the area of James Island, which was a few kilometers from Kate's house. Another team member, former homicide detective Eugene Fraser, made an intriguing discovery. He spoke with several acquaintances living in James Island and found it odd that Ethan Mack, who had voluntarily let the police inspect his home, did not actually live there. Instead, he rented an apartment in a nearby building, which Eugene was fortunate to uncover, because one of his acquaintances happened to be the landlord of the apartment Ethan had rented. Digging deeper, the detectives discovered that the police had barely scratched the surface in their investigation into Ethan. A cursory search of his mother's house was all they had done. The team decided to take matters into their own hands and uncovered a vital lead. Ethan had a girlfriend, Heather Camp. When they questioned Kate's parents about her, her mother recalled a peculiar encounter. Kate had met Heather on a train from Washington, D.C. About a month before her disappearance, when Kate was having issues with her Russian visa. Heather claimed her wallet had been stolen, leaving her penniless, and Kate sympathetically offered to lend her a substantial amount of money. Heather stated she had landed a pediatric surgeon position in South Carolina, set to start soon. Later, she announced her daughter had died in a New Jersey car crash, but her behavior was eerily calm, suggesting the news hadn't greatly affected her. The detectives also stumbled upon an intriguing fact. Heather was facing a fraud charge in Indiana for posing as a licensed doctor by falsifying documents. This new evidence forced them to re-examine the case from a different angle. They presented their findings to the police, but the authorities were surprisingly uncooperative and unwilling to continue the investigation. The team understood that the only way to get the police to take action was to gather irrefutable proof that linked Heather to Kate's disappearance. To achieve this, the team went to great lengths. They convinced the person who rented the apartment to Ethan Mack to install a secret camera outside his apartment door. Additionally, they placed a hidden GPS tracker in Ethan's car, enabling the team to track his movements and observe his activities. It didn't take long to yield results. After analyzing Ethan's travel patterns, the detectives found that he had visited numerous pawn shops across the city, selling small batches of various jewelry pieces. Although they couldn't confirm whether the jewelry belonged to Kate, the detectives believed they were getting close to a vital clue. After some time, Ethan and Heather faced a serious problem when their landlord threatened to evict them due to non-payment of rent. The team knew that if this happened, they would lose the opportunity to observe the couple's behavior and movements. To prevent this, they tried to persuade the landlord to change his mind. At the same time, the detectives quickly came up with a new plan. They asked the landlord to give Ethan and Heather more time to pay the rent, but only if they agreed to sign a contract promising to clear the debt. The strategy worked, and as soon as the landlord handed over the contract, the team sent it to the laboratory. The goal was to compare Ethan and Heather's handwriting on the contract with Kate's signature on the $4,000 check. This led to a significant breakthrough. The handwriting expert conclusively confirmed that the check signature was from the same person who had signed Heather's name on the contract, proving that Heather had forged Kate's signature. The team knew the police would be slow to act, so they came up with a new plan. They persuaded the landlord to cooperate and told Ethan that his apartment needed to be treated for insects. The team leader wore an exterminator suit and went to the apartment with the landlord. They waited until Ethan left the apartment, confirmed by his car moving away from the house before entering. However, they were met with an unwelcome surprise. Ethan was still at home. It turned out Heather was driving his car, but it was too late to abort the operation. The investigator had to improvise, insisting that fumigation was necessary, and asking Ethan to wait outside while the chemicals were sprayed. Ethan, none the wiser, agreed and left. Meanwhile, the investigator carefully searched the apartment for any evidence linking Ethan to Kate's disappearance. He searched Ethan's backpack and found Chinese money, the same notes found on Kate's bed. This was their first clue. Unfortunately, no other potential clues were found. The investigator and landlord pretended to finish the treatment and left. The team needed to regroup and devise another plan. Upon reviewing the footage from the camera in front of Ethan's apartment, detectives identified a frequent visitor, Terry Williams, a neighbor of the couple. They suspected Williams might have information about Ethan and Heather's involvement in Kate's disappearance, so they took a bold step. The team offered Williams a substantial sum of money in exchange for information about his friend's actions regarding Kate. They brought the money to Williams' apartment, but were met with an unexpected turn of events. At the time of the offer, Heather was at her home, where she overheard the entire conversation. Apparently, there was a prior discussion between Ethan and Williams. When the detective approached Williams, Heather panicked. She frantically called Ethan, explaining the situation. The investigation team was caught off guard and spent the following days struggling to determine their next move. In a shocking turn of events, Williams unexpectedly reached out to the detectives and asked them to come to his home to talk. When the detectives arrived at his apartment, Williams was surprisingly open and honest. He told them that although Ethan and Heather hadn't directly confided in him, he had had his suspicions about their involvement in Kate's disappearance. Williams then handed over an iPod he had received from Heather shortly after Kate went missing, which he had assumed belonged to Kate. The detectives analyzed the iPod and were able to trace its ownership to Kate using its serial number. This discovery provided the final piece of evidence needed to reopen the case. This time, the authorities couldn't ignore the evidence and finally arrested Ethan and Heather. During the initial interrogation, Heather agreed to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for a lighter sentence. She claimed Kate's body was located on Walhalla Island, approximately 20 miles from her residence. A police search team scoured the area all day but failed to find Kate's body. It became apparent that Heather had deliberately misled them. Andy Savage decided to employ a new tactic. Recognizing that Heather was likely directly involved in Kate's murder, he met with her and promised to help. Andy offered her a deal. In exchange for revealing the exact location of Kate's body, he would assist in getting her off the forgery charges. Heather, believing it was her only chance, agreed. She provided a detailed description of the location, indicating that Kate's body was still on the outskirts of Walhalla Island. The detectives, minus the police, decided to investigate the location without alerting the authorities. However, they faced disappointment and did not find Kate's body. The next day, they returned and made a discovery. They found the remains of the young woman. Although the forensic doctors could not determine the cause of death, the perpetrator soon began to confess. In August 2009, Heather signed a confession for murder, obstruction of justice, and bank check forgery. It was discovered that she had been committing fraud for years and had targeted Kate as her next victim during a trip from Washington. Later, she met Ethan and began a relationship with him. Ethan's trial began in October 2010, during which the prosecution presented Heather's testimony to reconstruct the events surrounding Kate's disappearance. According to Heather, on the day Kate vanished, Kate discovered that Heather had deceived her and stolen her credit cards. Kate threatened to inform her father, which would likely lead to police involvement. Heather confided in Ethan, who sided with her despite his long-standing friendship with Kate. The investigation revealed that Kate was not alone with Ethan that night. Heather was also present. It appears that the pair attempted to negotiate with Kate at the restaurant to prevent her from exposing the deception. Heather may have promised to return the stolen credit cards and money, which were at Ethan's apartment when the three arrived. The court questioned Heather's account and ultimately sentenced her to 39 years in prison. Ethan received a slightly lighter sentence of 25 years, largely due to Heather also being charged with fraud. Nova Welsh was born in Jamaica on June 1957. She had a loving family where everyone looked out for one another. When she was 10, she and her family relocated to the United Kingdom to start a new life. By the age of 16, she had found herself a boyfriend and had left her family's house to move in with him when she got pregnant with their first child. They ended up having 2 children, Jonathan and Leah. They lived in a 3-story apartment in Lighthorn Avenue in Ladywood, Birmingham. Osmond Bell, Nova's boyfriend and the father of her children, was a violent person, and more often than not, they both get into arguments. Those close to Nova were aware of the toxic relationship between her and Osmond Bell. Nova had once told her sister, Valerie Welsh, that Osmond had hit her occasionally, and their neighbors who lived just below their flat said the couple would always get into arguments while raising their voices. After some time, Nova Welsh became unhappy living with Osmond Bell, and her initial love for him began to dwindle and eventually vanished, due to his constant abuse. She then found a new love and started dating and going out with another man called Wayne Newby. Just like every normal relationship, Wayne Newby often visited Nova Welsh in her flat. But this wasn't approved by Osmond Bell, who didn't like seeing another man. This caused further problems in their relationship as they constantly argued about her going out at night. According to Nova Welsh's stepsister, Sonia, the couple had a heated argument in June of 1981. Sonia, who was in the apartment at the time, said she heard screaming and went into the kitchen to see what the problem was, only to find a terrified Nova and an angry Osmond Bell who had a dishcloth wrapped around his hands. Clearly seeing and sensing trouble in the air, Sonia decided to call the police even though Osmond Bell had told her not to. The police eventually came around, but Nova Welsh didn't make a complaint against Osmond Bell. She told the police that they had been arguing and she wanted him to leave. Osmond Bell eventually left the apartment in the early days of July 1981. Since the apartment was rented in Nova's name, had lashed out because he couldn't stand by and see another man coming into the flat. Probably made him feel small. By the time all these were happening, Nova Welsh's family had moved to the United States of America with the hope of having her and her 2 sons join them soon. Nova was loved by everyone and easily found family and friends. She was outspoken and had friends whom she told her relationship ordeals. She had once told her friend, Joan Campbell, that Osmond Bell had grabbed her round the neck so tight that she complained to him that it hurt. She also showed her friend, Pauline Davis, the marks on her neck. She said Osmond Bell had tried to strangle her because she went out at night. Days after he left, Osmond Bell would write threatening letters to Nova Welsh telling her if he couldn't have her, then nobody could. He had also threatened to kill her in one of his letters that said, "If you don't have me back, then you know what I will have to do." Nova Welsh cut all ties with him and focused on her new relationship with Wayne Newby. On the 27th of July, 1981, Nova Welsh stopped answering her phone. Her mother, Lorna Welsh, had tried to call her from the United States to confirm when she would be coming to join the family, but the 24-year-old mother of 2 wouldn't pick her calls and had disappeared with no trace. Her friends were equally surprised about her sudden disappearance because it was very unlike her to leave without informing anyone. According to her friends, before her disappearance, she had dropped off her 2 children with her ex-lover, Osmond Bell, and had gone out dancing with her new boyfriend Wayne Newby and a group of friends. She returned that evening but appeared upset. Neighbors said that they had heard crying and fighting coming from Nova's apartment on the day she disappeared. They felt it was a usual occurrence as her ex-lover was known to be violent and abusive. Weeks went by without a word from Nova. Her mother became even more distressed that she couldn't get a hold of her daughter. Nova Welsh didn't show up at her job where she worked as a part-time cleaner. Her disappearance was getting worrisome to everybody around her. So, 2 weeks later, on August 9, 1981, Lorna Edmond, her best friend, reported her missing to the police. The police then came into her apartment to search for clues that could have led to her disappearance. While they were investigating her case, Osmond Bell was interviewed by the police. He knew she was missing but never reported it to the police, claiming that he thought she had ran away with her new boyfriend or visited her family in the United States. His explanation seemed logical enough, and without evidence, the police were forced to release him. The search for Nova continued. On August 12, 1981, Nova's friend, Lorna Edmond, received an anonymous letter saying that the author's boyfriend had seen Nova and the same guy she had been out with night before grabbed her and hit her. The writer was implying that Wayne Newby had something to do with Nova Welsh's disappearance. The police investigated the letter and still had no clue on what had happened to Nova Welsh. The forensics determined the letter to be truly written by a female. The police who had interviewed Wayne Newby before called him in for another round of interrogation. He still maintained that he had nothing to do with Nova Welsh's disappearance. On August 18, 1981, there was a shocking discovery made in the flat where Nova Welsh lived. Neighbors reported an awful smell coming from somewhere in Nova's apartment. When the maintenance team came around to search the apartment, a strong smell pulled them towards the stairs. Just beneath it, they discovered a utility cupboard, and in it lies Nova's decomposed body, covered in a blanket and newspapers. Nova Welsh, whom the police and the public had been looking for, was in her apartment, dead and rotting away. According to her autopsy results, Nova had suffered from a broken neck which led to her death. Her death came as a shock to everyone in her community. Her family in Miami was informed about the discovery, and they were so sad and heartbroken. In a bid to find the perpetrator of this evil act, the police started their investigation. The first suspect that came to mind was Osmond Bell. He was then arrested and held in custody for 4 days while the police did their initial investigation. The issue of the letter Lorna Edmond had received was brought up, and the police asked Osmond Bell if he knew anything about the author of the letter. He, however, denied it. Due to lack of sufficient evidence to link Osmond Bell to the killing, they were forced to release him again. The police did all they could to find Nova Welsh's murderer, but all efforts was in vain. After a while, the case went cold for 35 years. In 2016, when there was a significant advancement in DNA technology, detectives from the cold case department were going through cold cases. They became particularly focused and hopeful in Nova Welsh's case. Her file contained a piece of chewing gum that was used to close secure the cupboard door of where her body had been found, and also, there was the letter that had been sent to Lorna Edmond. Having taken the evidence to a crime lab, they found out that the DNA on the chewing gum is the same as the DNA on the seal of the letter. After that, they got a court order to secure DNA from the initial suspects in 1981. Osmond Bell's DNA was taken and compared with that of the chewing gum and letter. Fortunately, there was a match. He was then arrested and had his trial started in February of 2017. At the court, witnesses took their stand, citing his abusive nature and the letters he had written to Nova Welsh threatening to kill her if she left him. Nova Welsh's neighbors, Carmen and Wendell Turner, who lived in the flat below, had heard what appeared to be the cupboard door being forcibly shut on the night Nova Welsh disappeared on July 26, 1981. At around 12:30 a.m. in the early hours of the next day, Carmen and Wendell Turner heard two bangs. They said the second bang sounded like somebody was kicking the door. Carmen said the noise could have come from the cupboard. The prosecution of the case argued that despite finding out that Nova Welsh was missing, Osmond Bell never reported to the police because he is the killer. He further mentioned that the letter and the seal of the envelope was taken for testing for DNA and it matched with that of Osmond Bell. The prosecution said he sealed the envelope to divert suspicion onto Wayne Newby, which it did at the time. However, Osmond Bell had a different opinion to that, saying his DNA must have appeared on the letter when he touched it while being subjected to a dark and terrible interrogation in the days after Nova Welsh's body was found. He claimed that during a break in police interviews, he was left alone in the room where he had been allowed to touch and read the letter. When asked by his attorney, Jeremy Dine, if he had ever been in the cupboard where Nova Welsh's body was found, he said he had been there up to 3 times while running a business restoring washing machines from a nearby garage. Osmond Bell mentioned that he had also been in the cupboard with his business partner and his brother. He said in court, the very first time we went in was to gain access to the pipe. We were going to attach a hose to the stopcock. He further claimed to have used a discarded piece of gum as a form of filler in order to secure the door after he had forced it open. He said he had secured the cupboard by using the screws that were there and also used a chewing gum in place of glue. To him, all these explains why his DNA was found on the letter and chewing gum. Osmond Bell fervently denied killing Nova Welsh. In his words, he said, "We had 2 wonderful children and, although we had our differences towards the end, you do have feelings for the mother of your children." The prosecutor, who wasn't buying Osmond Bell's lies, said, "It's 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance of the DNA not matching Osmond Bell. He is the man that tampered with the lock on the cupboard door and hid the body there. It would be an extreme coincidence if the killer was somebody other than Osmond Bell." However, after a long 6 weeks trial, the court determined that the murder had not been premeditated. The judge said Osmond Bell got into a fit of rage when he found out that Nova Welsh was seeing another man. Some people seemed to disagree with the judge, citing letters Osmond had written to Nova Welsh, threatening to kill her if she left him. They concluded that it was indeed premeditated. Regardless, Osmond Bell was cleared of murder but was convicted of manslaughter by an 11-1 majority verdict at the Birmingham Crown Court. He was then sentenced to 12 years in prison. The judge said he would serve half of his time in prison and the other half on license. Nova Welsh's family and friends are happy for the eventual justice and closure they now have. Nova Welsh's sister, Valerie Welsh, said the family had forgiven her sister's killer. In her words, "To be honest, my family and we forgive him, but he still need to pay for what he done." Lorna Edmond, Nova's best friend, said, "Nova was a lovely person, always happy and smiling. She was a devoted mother who loved her 2 boys very much. I often think about the old times and the things we used to do. I still miss Nova and only hope that her family can now find some peace. Nova can rest in peace knowing that justice has been done. I will never forget her. Till we meet again, Nova. Love, your friend Lorna." Nova's mom, Lorna Welsh, said, "Finally, after 36 long years, Nova can rest in peace. The family can now have closure knowing the person who took Nova's life has been brought to justice. I would sincerely like to thank everyone involved in bringing this case to court. In her victim's impact statements, Lorna Welsh said that Nova was gentle, loving, and full of life, and that but the unfortunate and tragic loss of her life prevented her from seeing her children grow up as young adults. Recently, many cold cases are being solved. Families of murder victims now have a glimmer of hope. We hope that the perpetrators of evil acts be brought to justice before they get a chance to go 6 feet under the ground. The chilling case of Grace Mullane. Grace Emmy Rose Mullane was born on December 2, 1996, in Wickford, Essex, to her parents Gillian and David Mullane. She was the youngest of her 3 siblings and was known to be a lovely, outgoing, fun-loving, and family-oriented daughter who loved creativity and the arts. Given the family's close bond, Grace maintained daily contact with her siblings and parents, even while she had been away at the University of Lincoln, where she studied advertising and marketing. In 2018, 21-year-old Grace Mullane finally graduated with a bachelor's degree in advertising and marketing. Like most young people around that age, Grace decided that she would celebrate the end of her university education with a gap year before she settled down into a steady career. She decided to take a year out to travel South America before heading to New Zealand to tour there. She set out for a 10-month solo adventure in October 2018, initially visiting Peru before setting off for South America on November 19th. Grace arrived in New Zealand and checked into the base backpackers hostel in Auckland, ready for a 2-week stay traveling around the Upper North Island. It was in New Zealand that Grace met up with her Tinder match, a 28-year-old man named Jesse Kempson, on December 1, 2018. Jesse Kempson was born on December 28, 1991, in Lower Hutt, New Zealand, but he grew up in Wellington. His parents separated when he was young, and for a time he was raised by his grandparents. He moved to Australia with his mother as a teenager, but by 2016, he had returned to New Zealand and was living in a boarding house in Wellington. Little did Grace know that Jesse had a more sinister side to him. Jesse was known to be a very charming lad, and he used that to his advantage to manipulate people. He couldn't hold a job or accommodation because of his compulsive lies. On one occasion, Jesse lied to his former landlord that he was a professional softball player, freshly signed up by New Zealand's national softball team, the Black Sox, and claimed that his contract money was coming, so that he could pay for rent. This went on for 2 months, only for the landlord to find out from the Black Sox management that nobody knew who he was. Unfortunately, the landlord found out also that he fled to another place without his knowledge, leaving him more than $1,700 out of pocket. At times, he had also claimed to have a bachelor's degree in international law, come from a family of millionaires who were looking to buy a top Oakland restaurant, and have contacts within Immigration New Zealand, and many other lies he mentioned to people. In reality, Jesse was nothing more than a fantasist who could only impress people with exaggerated stories. His former roommates in a boarding house in Green Lane found him unsettling and untrustworthy before he eventually moved into City Life apartments. On another occasion, a woman he lived with claimed he stole money from her home and fled, leaving his City Life landlord thousands of dollars short after Jesse lied that he got paid monthly and still failed to make rent payments. Jesse remained an enigma to many, fabricating his way through life and seemingly evading consequences repeatedly. Back in the hostel where Grace was staying, she was happily conversing with Jesse. The unsuspecting 21-year-old Grace was charmed by Jesse, even sending a text to her close friend Anna back home, telling her that she clicked with the guy. As it was a Saturday and her 22nd birthday was the next day, Grace didn't want to spend it alone and decided to go out to celebrate. She decided to meet up with Jesse Kempson, as he lived 5 minutes down the road from where Grace was staying, and they needed to get to know each other better. On the day the Tinder matches were supposed to, Grace got ready for her big night out and felt nothing but excitement and optimism for the evening ahead. Grace left the base backpackers hostel in Auckland at 6 p.m. and went into the city center streets, dressed in a black dress and carrying a small handbag, unaware of the tragic turn of events that was about to unfold. The evening appeared to be going well, and the two visited a room with blue-colored walls before leaving together around 9:30 p.m. The next day was Grace's 22nd birthday, but she was not responding to the birthday wishes from her family and friends. This silence caused concern and panic, especially among her family members. It was unusual for Grace, as she would regularly update her family about her trip, bombarding them with details and pictures of her adventures. Grace's parents contacted the Auckland police and reported her as missing on December 5th. The detectives did not initially suspect any foul play, as they learned that Grace had not returned to the hostel on the night of December 1st, and thought that perhaps she was staying with some new friends. It did not take long to trace Grace's whereabouts on the night she disappeared due to the extensive network of CCTV cameras around the city, and the mysterious man she was seen with that night was identified as Jesse Kempson. On the night Jesse was going to meet Grace, he dropped by a local bar, the Blue Stone Room, right next to the City Life Hotel where he was living. Jesse was observed consuming 4 bottles of beer, half an hour before their scheduled meeting with Grace, appearing solitary in a drinking establishment, away from the main commercial area of Milan. Meanwhile, Grace was already at the base of the Sky Tower, the location they had agreed to meet, demonstrating her eagerness to potentially commence a holiday romance. The Sky Tower is very well known in New Zealand's biggest city, and is one of the most obvious icons on the city's skyline, visible for miles around and the focus of many events. Most importantly, it is highly public, and the sort of location where Grace would have felt safer to meet someone. As Jesse arrived, the pair recognized each other almost immediately, and he hugged her as she smiled and moved towards him. Their first stop was a burger restaurant and bar on the first floor of the adjacent Sky City complex. Their entire time together at Sky City was caught on camera, and the footage showed them chatting as they went up on an escalator to Andy's Burger and Bar, where they ordered cocktails from a barman and moved on to a table to talk. An hour and a half later, they left the bar and headed back outside and onto a restaurant less than a block away, the Mexican Cafe. After consuming 2 jugs of margarita and 1 of sangria, they left the cafe and headed to the Blue Stone Room where he had been drinking alone earlier. At 8:40 p.m., Jesse put his hand behind Grace's head and pulled it towards his, kissing her for a second or so. Over the next hour, they kissed several times more, only stopping briefly while Kempson walked out of shot, and Grace checked her phone, as it turned out, sending her final message to her friend Anna. Then Grace also walked out of the shot. Jesse had gone onto his phone to post a message on her Facebook profile picture, saying she was beautiful and very radiant, an act that led the detectives right to him. Soon after 9:30 p.m., the footage showed them leaving and heading to the lobby of the City Life Hotel, where they entered the lift. Jesse searched for his keycard as they made their way towards room 308. What happened in room 308 after the couple arrived is unknown, apart from the fact that Jesse murdered Grace. By 1:30 a.m., Grace was found dead inside the room. It is clear that Grace never left the building, and Jesse did not call emergency services or even ask for help when she died. After Grace's death, Jesse carried out several internet searches, which indicated not only how unconcerned he was about her death, but how he was actively planning to conceal it. Using his mobile phone, he searched for information on the most intense fires and the ranges of waiter care. He also searched for the location where he would later try to bury Grace in a shallow grave. The perpetrator then browsed a website to watch videos. Jesse also took 7 intimate photographs of Grace's dead body, including close-ups, manipulating her body to get the shots he wanted. The following morning, with Grace still lying dead in room 308, he texted another woman he had met on Tinder, trying to arrange a date for later that day. Shortly after, he was again captured on CCTV footage, moving from his room to a leisure store to purchase a suitcase, and then to a supermarket to acquire some cleaning supplies. He then rented a red Toyota hatchback vehicle, and as Grace lay deceased in his hotel room, he departed in the afternoon to meet up with the woman he had been exchanging text messages with earlier in the day at a bar named Rory, located in the fashionable Ponsonby suburb. Soon after meeting him at the Rory bar, he told her that all his friends were police officers and that his closest friend was coming to New Zealand to be a Crown prosecutor. When they discussed a murder trial she had once attended, he told her it was crazy how people can make one wrong move and go to jail for the rest of their lives. He then went on to say that he had heard about a guy who asked his girlfriend to have rough sex, but it had gone wrong and she had died in the process, which made the woman uncomfortable. Jesse continued with his lies for the rest of the conversation, and she became increasingly uneasy. When she left the bar, despite her anxiety, Jesse later texted her asking for another date, which she turned down. After he returned to his room around 5:45 p.m. on December 2nd, he hired a rug doctor machine to thoroughly clean the carpet, telling the shopkeeper he needed it to remove a red wine stain. Later, he parked his rental car outside the hotel, retrieved a trolley from the reception, went upstairs and came back with the trolley, which was now carrying 2 large suitcases, one of which matched the one he had purchased earlier. He loaded the cases into the car and moved it to a nearby car park. The silver suitcase contained Grace's body, while the second case was used as a cover to avoid suspicion. Throughout the day, the CCTV revealed he changed his clothes repeatedly. Early the next day, at around 6:15 a.m., Jesse was spotted leaving the hotel and driving off in his car, stopping only to buy a shovel at a store out of town. By that time, Grace's parents were concerned after she did not reply to birthday wishes they sent her. 3 days later, Grace was reported missing by her parents, and a huge hunt got underway on the 7th of December, 2018. Grace's father, David Mullane, arrived in New Zealand to make an emotional appeal for any information about his daughter's disappearance. Jesse had been identified by a detective as a suspect after Grace's mother had noticed that he had left a message on her Facebook page at 9:29 p.m. on the 1st of December, just 11 minutes before they left the Blue Stone Room and went to his room. Jesse was interrogated for the first time by Detective Diana Levinson. He claimed that he had met Grace, but they parted at 10 p.m. on Saturday, and that was the last time he saw her. In the meantime, the detectives had acquired the CCTV footage from the hotel, which proved he was lying. By the time of his second interview, he had no choice but to admit to killing Grace, relying instead on the excuse that she had died during sex by accident, after she asked him to choke her in an attempt to make sex more pleasurable. Following the interview, he was arrested and took officers to Grace's body. Grace's body was found on the 9th of December at around 4 p.m. She had been buried off Scenic Drive in the Waiheat Care Rangers Regional Park, and a post-mortem examination was done on the 10th of December. The autopsy determined that Grace had been strangled, and the bruises on her body were consistent with being restrained. The murder trial began in Auckland on November 4, 2019. Kempson attempted to explain Grace's death as being accidental after a rough encounter had gone wrong, but the jury rejected his claim and found him guilty. Jesse Kempson was convicted of murder on the 22nd of November 2019, when he was 28 years old. During his trial, he was described as a sociopath who made some of the women he met or communicated with on Tinder highly uncomfortable. It later emerged that he took another British tourist out on a Tinder date before bringing her back to his Auckland motel room 8 months before he met Grace. Jesse sexually assaulted the tourist, then 21, while she lay on the bed crying and frozen with fear after she refused to have sex with him. She kept the attack secret until she recognized Jesse from media coverage the day he was charged with Grace's murder. Another of the women he communicated with on the internet, who was wary of meeting him, shared a series of messages in which he detailed his sexual preferences and admitted to her why he enjoyed doing what he did. It was speculated that Jesse's desire for domination was the underlying factor that led to Grace's tragic demise. In another trial, he was convicted of terrorizing his former girlfriend over months, subjecting her to violent assaults, threatening her with a butcher's knife, and forcing her into humiliating acts after telling her he had been sent by the CIA to kill her. Jesse was unwilling to accept what he had done and showed no remorse. On the 21st of February 2020, Jesse was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. Grace's story has raised awareness about the importance of safety for travelers, especially young women, exploring the world. It has sparked initiatives and support networks to empower individuals and enhance safety measures. As we remember Grace, we honor her memory by advocating for safer travel experiences and raising awareness about the risks that travelers may face. Her legacy serves as a reminder that no one should experience harm while exploring the world. In the end, Grace Emmy Rose Mullane's legacy will be one of remembrance and hope. May her memory inspire us to continue working towards a world where travel is safe, and where every individual, no matter where they are, is free from harm and can pursue their dreams. 20-year-old Renee Blackmore was an Army private. She was stationed at Fort Benning in Georgia in April of 1982. She was last seen leaving her barracks. A month later, in May 1982, Renee's wallet and sweater were discovered beside a road a few miles from the Army post. Then in June, Renee's body was found on a logging road a few miles away. Investigators determined that someone fatally shot her. Despite an extensive investigation, it took a few decades for investigators to find the person responsible. Then, in April 2022, investigators announced that 64-year-old Marcellus McCluser was arrested in connection to the case. He is already serving a life sentence for an unrelated slaying. Kimberly Schwartz, who is the Assistant District Attorney of the Chattahoochee Judicial Circuit, had this to say: "We know that she didn't get to celebrate her 21st birthday. We don't know who she might have loved or the relationship she might have built, what dreams she might have realized. All of those things got extinguished by a blast from a cheap shotgun about 2 miles from the middle of nowhere down in South Chattahoochee County 40 years ago. There is no expiration date on that kind of evil." Renee's mother, Donna Reitman, said in a statement that her daughter was a focused young woman who loved laughing and having fun with friends. "I have lived these 40 years always feeling the pain her absence causes," Ryman said, "and believing no one outside of her family and friends even cared. It is with a grateful heart that on March 28, 2022, this belief was shown to be untrue." Investigators haven't said what exactly led to the arrest, but said McCluster had always been a suspect. They just never had enough evidence. The investigation gained new life in 2020 when the Georgia Bureau of Investigation formed a cold case unit made up of retired agents. McCluster is currently awaiting trial. Brittany Drexel was born in Rochester, New York on October 7, 1991. Her mother is Dawn Drexel. In her teens, Brittany aspired to a career in nursing, cosmetology, or modeling. She suffered from depression. In April 2009, 17-year-old Brittany asked Dawn if she could go to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina over spring break with her boyfriend, John Greco, and some other friends. Dawn refused, since she did not know any of the other teenagers, and there were no adults on the trip. She also had a bad feeling about it. Dawn's refusal led to an argument between her and Brittany for the next few days. Then, on the 22nd, Brittany asked her mom if she could go to her friend's house for a few days. Dawn agreed. Instead of going to her friend's house, Brittany left for Myrtle Beach that day with her friends. Her boyfriend John did not go along due to work commitments. She and her friends stayed at the Bar Harbor Hotel. 3 days after arriving there, Brittany called Dawn to tell her that she was at the beach. This did not alarm Dawn, as she believed it was a beach close to home and not Myrtle Beach. That evening around 8 p.m., Brittany left her friends at the Bar Harbor Hotel beachfront. She then walked about 2 miles south down South Ocean Boulevard to visit a friend of hers. The friend is 20-year-old Peter Borisowitz, who is a nightclub promoter. They met a few years back in Rochester, New York. He was also vacationing in Myrtle Beach, and he was staying at the Blue Water Resort with his friends. There are security footage at the Blue Water Resort showing her entering the building. She was carrying a beige purse and wearing a black and white tank top, flip-flops, and shorts. The cameras captured her leaving around 8:45 p.m. After leaving, Brittany started texting John. They texted back and forth until 9:15 p.m. Her text then suddenly stopped. John got worried, so he called her friends at Myrtle Beach to see if they knew where she was or what had happened. When they couldn't help him, he decided to call Dawn. This was the first time she had heard that Brittany had gone to Myrtle Beach. She tried reaching Brittany, but when that failed, she called Rochester police so they could contact Myrtle Beach police to help find Brittany. The next morning, Myrtle Beach police started to look for her. They followed her movements and took a look at the security footage from Blue Water Resort. They also questioned Broswitz, as he was the last person to have seen her. Thereafter, they searched Brittany's hotel room. All of the clothing she had packed was there, but not her cell phone or her purse could be found. With the help of cell phone towers and service providers, The police tracked her phone on a path leading 60 miles south of Myrtle Beach in an area near the Georgetown-Charleston County line. The pings from the phone had stopped abruptly early on the morning of April 26th. This was the morning after she had last been seen. Areas around there and Myrtle Beach where a body might have been disposed of were then searched for nearly 2 weeks. In 2011, investigators searched an apartment in Georgetown County, but this resulted in no useful leads. Brittany's case was featured on Dr. Phil. Don and Brazowitz had several confrontations on the show. Brazowitz seemed to be more concerned at the damage to his reputation than his longtime friend being missing. Don permanently relocated to Myrtle Beach to be close to where Brittany was last seen and better monitor the progress of the investigation. Don's theory was that Brittany went to Myrtle Beach because she had been promised something of interest, such as a modeling job. Don believed that her daughter had been trafficked. Myrtle Beach police claimed this was not the case as there was not trafficking in the area. This is complete nonsense as Horry County, where Myrtle Beach is located, is listed as the #1 county in South Carolina for reported trafficking victims. In the years since Brittany has disappeared, there have been a lot of theories and suspects and false confessions, but I decided it's not necessary to cover all of it in this video. In early May 2022, Georgetown County deputies arrested 62-year-old Raymond Moody in connection to Brittany's disappearance. We learned that he had been a person of interest for a decade. A week after being arrested on May 11, 2022, investigators found human remains buried in the woods off a gated private drive outside Georgetown. The remains were identified as Brittany's using DNA and dental records. The arrest warrants alleged she had been strangled by Moody on the day that she was last seen and buried on the following day. Don had this to say at a press conference: "This is truly a mother's nightmare. I am mourning my beautiful daughter Brittany as I have been for 13 years, but today it's bittersweet. We are much closer to the closure and peace that we have been desperately hoping for. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter. The search for Brittany is now a pursuit of Brittany's justice. Is currently being held without bail at the Georgetown County Jail. As this case is still unfolding at this point in time, we do not yet know how investigators came to identify Moody as the one who took Brittany's life. We also don't know why he did what he did." Sheriff Carter Weaver said at the press conference, "The why may never be known or understood. But today this task force can confidently and without hesitation answer the rest of those questions, along with the who is responsible." To the Drexel family, we mourn with you and pray for you as you cope with the tragedy of 13 years ago. No one deserves to go through this, and our hearts go out to you. Our only hope is that this finding allows your family to grieve properly for Brittany. We know that Brittany's body was found 2.5 miles from a motel where Moody had been staying when she went missing. We also know that Moody spent 21 years in prison for abducting and assaulting a 9-year-old California girl. He was considered a suspect in a lot of similar cases but never charged. While I was writing the script for the video, new information came out. We now know that Moody confessed to the crime. Prosecutors now say that Brittany left the Blue Water Resort and voluntarily got into a car somewhere nearby. She was then driven 35 miles south to Georgetown County, where she was held against her will. She was then assaulted and strangled at a boat ramp on Santee River and then buried in the wooded area. Georgetown County Sheriff's Office said that those details are from Moody and warned that the information should be taken with a pinch of salt. Deputies also said that Moody was the one that led authorities to Brittany's body. This heavily implicates him, as how else would he have known where she was buried? Police said Moody had been pulled over for speeding on April 26, 2009 in the town of Surfside. This was a day after she was last seen and a day after he buried her body. But just think how amazing it would have been if they caught this asshole there and then. Monica Diane Sanders was born April 15, 1968 to Doris and James Sanders. She was described as a sweet, kind-hearted person that loved children. She graduated from Falk High School and became a fifth-year ballet student. On August 21, 1988, 20-year-old Monica went to a dance club, formerly called The Pines, on Highway 67 in Texarkana, Arkansas, which is now called Electric Cowboy. Her friends were ready to leave before she was, so a man named Johnny offered to give her a ride home so she could stay. She was later seen leaving with 26-year-old Johnny Westbrook, a man that lived only a couple of blocks from her family. Monica had planned a birthday party for her 7-year-old sister, Christy, the very next day, but she never showed up. Concerned, her mother walked over to the neighbor's house where Monica was supposed to have stayed the night. However, Monica was nowhere to be found. They quickly went to police to report her missing, but were frustratedly told that they had to wait 48 hours before making the report. Sadly, 9 days later, her body was found in Mercer Bayou in a wooded area in Texarkana. Investigators say she had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and shot 3 times in the chest, and her teeth had been knocked out. Strangely, her killer neatly folded her clothing and placed them along with her boots next to her body. The man she left the club with that night, Johnny Westbrook, was later arrested and charged with her murder. There were 3 suspected accomplices as well: David Brown, Kendall Payne, and Rick Flippo. One was arrested, but the charges were dropped. The other men were never charged, but all 4 reportedly failed a lie detector test. While interviewing Johnny, police noticed he had 3 scratches on his torso the day after she went missing. They took pictures and questioned him about the scratches, but he gave conflicting stories on how he received them. However, this info was never turned into the jury during his trial for first-degree murder, and Johnny would be acquitted. Her family believes someone out there knows what happened, and they pray that they come forward to give them closure. Because Monica was known for her love of children, the Fox City Park was renamed Monica Sanders Memorial Park. Sadly, it was later vandalized, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.